Christ-empowered living, celebrating your significance in God, by Selwyn Hughes. Chapter 7. There's more. Whatever is meant by that elusive term, person, we mean someone who is a physical being, who can relate, think, feel, and choose. We have been saying problems can arise because of physical malfunction and unsatisfied deep longings. If God is not meeting the deep ache in our hearts for a relationship with Him in which we feel secure, significant, and worthwhile, then we will seek to have that ache satisfied in some other direction. Consider now with me the third area of human functioning, our ability to think. How and what we think determines the direction we will go to have our thirst quenched. There can be rational causes behind behavior. This ache we all feel in our hearts for a vertical relationship is not something God condemns. He designed us that way in the first place. What God condemns is the foolish and pointless ways we go about trying to satisfy that ache. And these foolish and pointless ways have their origins in the mind. Our minds have been enemy territory since we arrived in this world. Satan, through the fall, has established a bridgehead in our minds and continuously sends his envoys across it to militate against the influences of the Trinity. This is how the Apostle Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so that they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Later in the same epistle, the great apostle said, "But I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ." 2 Corinthians 11, verse 3. When writing to the Ephesians, Paul puts it like this: "So I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts." Ephesians 4, verses 17 and 18. Not everyone is willing to admit that their mind is one of Satan's strongholds. "What is wrong with my mind?" they say. "I am a perfectly normal and rational person." But there is a world of difference between what the world accepts as normal and what the scriptures teach is normal. In the world, it is accepted as normal for a person to harbor resentment, to have periods of ill temper, to live together outside of marriage, or look after number one. None of these things belong to the Christian life. The New Testament claims that by the power of the indwelling Christ, life can be lived above all these wrong humors and lived without strain. When Adam and Eve rebelled against God, the result of believing the lie that they could be more fulfilled by acting independently of God, they plunged every one of their descendants into moral darkness. There is now a blindness in our minds. Though it does not prevent us from understanding scientific laws, mathematics, or any of the other things our educational establishment teaches us, when we try to comprehend the moral and spiritual world, we reveal our mental failure. Everyone is a fool. The Bible uses an interesting word to describe our mental failure to figure out the moral world. It is called folly or foolishness. The book of Proverbs has a lot to say about fools and foolishness. The way of a fool seems right to him, but a wise man listens to advice. Proverbs 12, verse 15. A fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in airing his own opinions. Proverbs 18, verse 2. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. Proverbs 22, verse 15. A fool in Proverbs is not someone who is intellectually challenged. A fool is someone who thinks he knows where life is to be found, but doesn't. And a child in whose heart folly resides, as our last text put it, may well be able to relate to other areas of life with a degree of wisdom. But when it comes to moral issues and behaving as God requires us to behave, mental bankruptcy will be revealed. King David, in one of his Psalms, wrote this: "The fool says in his heart, 'There is no God.' They are corrupt, their deeds are vile, there is no one who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on the sons of men to see if there are any who understand, any who seek God. All have turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one." Psalm 14, verses 1 through 3. Here is the issue in a nutshell. Every one of us comes into the world with the foolish idea that life can be found through our own resources and our own efforts. God says it can't. We think we know better. Where our foolish strategies take us. Because the very core of our thinking is corrupted with the lie that we can find satisfaction for our souls apart from God, our beliefs about moral issues are likely to be wrong. This mental strategy to bypass God in our efforts to satisfy the thirst in our souls is brought out most clearly by the prophet Jeremiah. Read this passage carefully. "Therefore I bring charges against you again, declares the Lord, and I will bring charges against your children's children. Cross over to the coasts of Kittim and look, send to Kedar, and observe closely. See if there has ever been anything like this. Has a nation ever changed its gods? Yet they are not gods at all. But my people have exchanged their glory for worthless idols. Be appalled at this, O heavens, and shudder with great horror, declares the Lord. My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water." Jeremiah 2, verses 9 through 13. Plainly, a trial is in progress. God is bringing charges against his people. But why? The Almighty, speaking metaphorically, accuses them of preferring to dig their own broken cisterns rather than rely in humble dependence on the Lord for their life. How pain God must have felt as he observed his people spurning his offer of living water, free for the taking, and laboriously digging their own cisterns. Matthew Henry said it well in his commentary on Jeremiah. The language is old-fashioned, but the point is powerful. "When they came to quench their thirst, there they found nothing but mud and mire and the filthy sediments of a standing lake. If we make an idol of anything, wealth or pleasure or honor, if we place our happiness in it and promise ourselves the comfort and satisfaction in it, which are to be had in God only, if we make it our joy and love, our hope and confidence, we shall find it a cistern, which we take a great deal of pains to hew out and fill, and at the best it will hold but a little water, and that dead and flat. It is a broken cistern that cracks and cleaves in hot weather, so that the water is lost when we have most need of it. Let us therefore with purpose of heart cleave to the Lord only, for whither else shall we go? He has the words of eternal life." There is something in all of us that hates the fact that apart from God we will never be able to satisfy the deep thirst and deep longing in our souls. Facing that truth requires that we adopt the position of helplessness, giving up our vain attempts to make life work without God, and helplessness is something our carnal nature abhors. We much prefer to be in control of the water we drink, and that is a strategy the Bible regards as foolish. Perhaps an illustration will throw some more light on the point I am making. When I was 12, in my native country of Wales, my class was instructed to write an essay on the theme of war and peace. After the task had been completed and the essays had been marked, the teacher stood at the front of the class and said something like this: "The essays have all been very good, but one is outstanding. That is the one written by Selwyn Hughes." I remembered thinking to myself, this feels so good to be singled out like this. Now picture me there as a boy of 12. What do you know about me? Very little, perhaps, but you know this: I was thirsty. My soul ached for something that no one or nothing has been able to satisfy. Now I was being singled out for praise in such a way that was like a drink to my parched soul. I liked what I felt, and a strategy began to develop in my thinking that ran along this line: I can put words together in such a way that brings recognition and praise. Perhaps that's the route to life. Perhaps that will satisfy my thirst. Of course, it wasn't clear to me then as I am putting it now, but something of that thinking began to develop in my mind, and although I studied to become an engineer, nothing satisfied me as much as putting words together on paper. When later I was called to the Christian ministry, one of the first things I did was to enroll in a writing course. Later I began to write a daily devotional, which I called Every Day with Jesus, that is now read on a daily basis by close to 500,000 people in more than 120 countries around the world. Sometimes on my speaking engagements, I am introduced as the pastor with the world's largest daily congregation. My success at writing has done two things for me. It has provided me a great deal of personal satisfaction, and it has given me a constant challenge to determine where my life is found, in writing or in God. Several years ago, one of my students sat in my office and said to me, "You talk to us a lot about finding our security and our significance in God. I wondered how you would feel if for some reason you were unable to write." I felt an inner tremble as I tried to reply. "Please leave me," I finally said. "I must deal with my heart quietly before God." In the hours that followed, I saw clearly that the strategy that had entered my mind as a boy of 12 was still there, covered over now by a veneer of spirituality, but still very much a part of my thinking. Was I wrong in enjoying the fact that I am read by 500,000 people every day? Of course not. What was wrong was depending on that for life. I was drinking from a leaky cistern. I saw myself as a consummate professional rather than a desperately needy servant dependent on God alone for my soul's satisfaction. There and then, I confessed my sin of misplaced dependency to the Lord, received His forgiveness, and rose to a new sense of commission. The student's question is now never far from my mind when I write. Daily I kneel before Him and say, "Lord, help me to draw always from you the water I need for my soul. Nothing satisfied but you, and you alone." We now have 3 of the 5 points we need to understand the rise and development of problems. They can arise first because of some physical malfunction. They can arise too because our deep thirsts for God set up longings in our hearts that we try to satisfy outside of God. And because we are foolish thinkers, we try to quench our spiritual thirst by drinking from cisterns of our own making. These cisterns do not hold satisfying water. They also leak. We go from one broken cistern to another, driven by strategies that make us feel we are in control. How foolish. The third key then to understanding how problems arise is unnoticed wrong thinking. Our freedom to choose. The fourth component of the personality that must be brought into focus if we are to comprehend fully how problems arise is the will. Volitional causes can affect behavior. Several things need to be understood about the will and its function. As we have seen, God is a choosing being, and He made us with the power of choice also. Every one of us, every day of our lives, makes hundreds of choices. We get up in the morning and choose the clothes that we will wear today. We choose what we will eat for breakfast. We choose what we will listen to on the radio as we drive to work. We choose what we will have for lunch and what we will do after work. The writer of the book of Proverbs reminds us that the Almighty makes choices too. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Proverbs 19:21. We make plans and God makes plans, but He allows us to go with His plans or against them, though ultimately His plans will prevail. While we are free to choose, we are not free to choose the consequences of our choosing. Moses, when laying before the ancient Israelites the challenges they would face when entering into the promised land, he said, "This day I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live." Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. The fact that the great Creator has endowed us with the ability to go against His will, if we so choose, is perhaps one of the most amazing things about our construction as human beings. Read this passage taken from the prophecy of Isaiah. "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn! You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." Isaiah 14, verses 12 through 14. Some commentators believe that here Isaiah is giving a description of the fall of Satan. And though that may be so, first and foremost he is talking about the king of Babylon. A famous Welsh preacher of a bygone generation, when referring to this text, makes the interesting point that 5 times in the passage we read the phrase, "I will." That, he points out, is what sin is essentially, a created will going against the will of the Creator. He adds this comment, "How awesome that God would create a will that has the potential of competing with His will." How awesome indeed. Also, the will does not have unlimited freedom. As someone put it, we are not free to shout fire in a crowded room, where there is no fire, of course. Someone else said, "My freedom to swing my arm ends at the tip of your nose." A person is free to jump off a high building, but having jumped, gravity takes over. We are free to act in many different ways, but our freedom is limited by law, either divine law or human law. Because we are volitional beings, everything we do has a purpose. Often, we are not conscious of the purpose behind our choices. I once spent time counseling a university student who kept failing his examinations, even though he had an IQ of 150. It was not until I thoroughly came to understand his experiences as a child that I began to comprehend what purpose his behavior served. When he was a child, his parents used to say, "If you do not pass all your examinations, we will not love you." Growing up in this atmosphere of conditional love, he became an angry young man. But because his relationship with his parents did not allow him to express his angry feelings directly, he expressed them indirectly. Here is another illuminating quotation from the book of Proverbs. "The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out." Proverbs 20, verse 5. The psychologist Adler made the point that the best way to understand any unit of behavior is to ask yourself, what is the goal to which the behavior is directed? What was the goal behind the university student's behavior? It was retaliation. He wanted to get back at his parents in a way that did not involve expressing his anger directly. Only when he understood the goal behind his behavior was he able to initiate change. One of the most insightful things I've ever discovered in my counseling ministry, and that was very helpful, is that all behavior moves toward a goal. For years, I spent a lot of time digging into people's pasts in order to find an explanation for their behavior. Though that is an important part of understanding why people behave as they do, it is more important to comprehend the goal to which the behavior is directed. Even the most bizarre behavior, like a young girl's risking death by anorexia nervosa, the determination to be thin, makes sense when the underlying purpose is understood. A further fact about this will is this: often we choose without realizing what we are choosing. The young university student I referred to earlier was choosing, albeit unconsciously, to fail his examinations, yet until the purpose behind his choice was exposed, he was not aware that he was choosing, but he was choosing nevertheless. Hosea 7 verses 8 and 9 says, Ephraim mixes with the nations, foreigners sap his strength, but he does not realize it. His hair is sprinkled with gray, but he does not notice. Most of us laugh at the idea of someone who has gray hair but doesn't notice it. But this is no different from a person who makes choices and doesn't realize it. Larry Crabb has a powerful phrase that illuminates this concept of unrealized choices. The loss of felt choice, he says, does not mean the loss of real choice. One reason for this unconscious choosing is because many of our ideas about life are formed in our developmental years, and sometimes in the midst of trauma and disappointment. And to anesthetize the pain, we block out any conscious recollection of these events. But often when we are choosing in later life, not only are these past events kept out of consciousness, but the ideas and strategies that were formed from them are kept at bay too. They are hidden beneath the surface. If you want to think more deeply about this, take an area of your life over which you feel you have little or no control, loss of temper, overeating, or habitual behaviors of any kind. You may feel you are driven by internal dynamics, driven against your will, but the truth is you are choosing to behave the way you do. Finding out what is behind these choices may require the help of a counselor, but never forget, the loss of felt choice does not mean the loss of real choice. Remember, too, that the will does not function in a vacuum. Behind our will is our whole nature. Driven by a desire to find what our heart truly longs for, fulfillment, and prone to rely on ourselves to achieve that fulfillment more than on God, our mind develops strategies that quickly translate into a goal. If deep down in my heart I believe that amassing money is the route to happiness, then it will not be long before my mind will come up with ideas to achieve that goal. And from there, the will takes over and presses on to what it believes is the goal to happiness. Behind most problems is an unrecognized wrong goal, and most of the work in counseling is helping a person discover that goal. The fourth key to understanding how problems arise is unrecognized wrong goals. How the emotions affect our behavior. One more consideration will complete our model. Our behavior can have emotional causes. We are not just physical, relational, rational, and volitional beings. We are emotional beings also, beings who can feel. One of the great debates in counseling literature takes place over the issue of how emotions arise and what are the most debilitating of these emotions. The word emotion is derived from the Latin emovere, meaning to move. 12 fundamental emotions have been identified by psychologists and philosophers, and these are repeatedly mentioned in philosophical literature. They are divided into 9 unpleasant emotions and 3 pleasant ones. The unpleasant ones are sorrow, fear, anger, jealousy, shame, disgust, pain, confusion, and emptiness. The pleasant ones are love, joy, and awe. I have found it more helpful myself to categorize unpleasant or problem emotions into 3 main categories. First, emotions like anger, irritation, resentment, frustration, and contempt. Second, emotions such as fear, anxiety, worry, apprehension, pressure, and forms of stress. And thirdly, emotions like guilt, shame, embarrassment, and self-pity. The interesting thing about these 3 streams of problem emotions is that most often they arise from a failure to reach the foolish goals we pursue. In other words, whenever any of the emotions I have mentioned arise within us, unless they are caused by physical malfunctioning, they are usually the result of some obstacle on the road to our goal, the goal we believe we have got to get in order to experience personal happiness or fulfillment. Our emotions, it is often pointed out, act like the red light on the dashboard of our car. The red light is not the problem, but indicates a problem is occurring that needs attention. It is the same with negative emotions. Their occurrence is a warning, telling us that all is not well in our internal emotional system. Signal emotions. I like the way Kevin Huggins puts it in Parenting Adolescence. God has given us a warning system to alert us when we are pursuing a foolish goal. This system contains a series of signal emotions that reliably indicate the nature of the goal we are pursuing at any given moment. For example, the Apostle Paul admonished his readers to recognize their anger as a signal to alert them to potentially sinful attitudes and actions. In order to understand how each of the three streams of emotions develops, it is necessary to identify the obstacles that lead to the rise of these negative feelings. Obstacle 1. Feelings such as anger, irritation, resentment, and contempt arise when a goal we have been pursuing is blocked by someone or some external circumstance. An illustration drawn from my counseling experience might help illuminate this point. A middle-aged man, a believer, asked to see me because his doctor had diagnosed his physical problems as psychosomatic. During the initial interviews, I learned that he was a handyman who liked to buy run-down property, refurbish it, then sell it for a much higher price than he paid for it. He had done this on 3 occasions in the past 3 years, and his wife, who was indulgent at first, got tired of living on a permanent building site and had informed him that unless he changed his ways and settled down in one home, she would leave him and consider their marriage to be over. It was clear to me that although he did not appear to show anger on the surface, inwardly he was deeply hostile toward his wife. It took him a while to admit his anger, several sessions in fact. One day after he did, I said, "Finish this sentence for me. For me to live is..." He paused for a moment and said, "For me to live is possessing the most magnificent home in the community so that friends and relatives can visit us and be impressed with the way I achieved it." Then he added, "As I am not able to purchase one at this stage in my life, I am working to get there stage by stage, refurbishing a rundown place, then selling it, investing the profit, and doing the same thing over and over again until one day I can afford to buy outright the house I want. What's wrong with that?" "There's nothing wrong in desiring to live in a magnificent home," I said, "but I wonder if that desire has become such a demand inside you that you perceive it to be the root to your personal significance." The Apostle Paul in Philippians 1, verse 21 said, "For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." I wonder if the desire to live in a magnificent home has turned into a demand, and you pursue that route because you see in that an offer of life. Is there a functional God for you in what you are doing? I shared with him more about the concept of goal-oriented behavior. I told him that when we foolishly take a certain course of action because we depend on that for our significance rather than Christ, then what that goal becomes is a blocked goal. And when it's undermined, frustration can erupt in feelings of irritation, anger, and resentment. "Here's my analysis of the situation," I said to him. "You have made it a goal, one day, to purchase the most magnificent home in your community because you perceive that to offer you significance. Such a route is not necessary to those who already realize they are significant in Christ. Lacking this sense of identity, you pursue the goal with passion. And now that your wife threatens to leave you, if you continue, the block to your goal has given rise to resentment, which in turn is the basis of your psychosomatic ailments." Further sessions involved exploring his wrong basic assumptions about life. As he came to learn that his relationship with God was sufficient to meet the deep longings of his heart, to be seen as worthwhile, he abandoned his wrong goal, asked his wife's forgiveness, and within days the psychosomatic problems disappeared. The irritation we feel is commensurate with how important and how dependent we are on the goal to achieve our worth. If we are only moderately dependent, then we feel the emotion only moderately. If we are strongly dependent, then we will feel the emotion strongly. Feelings of anger, irritation, resentment, and contempt for others arise because of an undermined goal. Something has intervened between us and the goal we foolishly believe will bring us the longings of our heart. I know of no better scripture to pull this into focus than the one found in the Epistle of James. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You want something but don't get it. You kill and covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. James 4, verses 1 and 2. Feelings of stress, fear, anxiety, worry, pressure, and the feelings that come from those feelings usually indicate a foolish goal whose attainment seems uncertain. These feelings often signal that the person has put his or her trust in something or someone for fulfillment, but is unsure and uncertain that the objective will be realized. Larry Crabb, in Effective Biblical Counseling, states that a strong contributing dynamic to this is a fear of failure. A person who fears that he or she may not reach the goal, a goal which may be perfectly attainable, will often waver in anxious indecision. A husband desires a good marital relationship. He believes it is possible. His wife is willing and cooperative, but he still hesitates, suspended in a state of motionless indecision. Why? He is afraid that he might make a mess of things, so that his best efforts would be substandards, and that he does nothing. The premise on which he is operating is simple. If I try and fail, I will have to admit I am a failure, and my self-concept couldn't stand that. If I never try, I can never avoid failure. But truly, if I'm honest, if I never try, then I will avoid failure. Every one of us has to recognize that we can never guarantee every effort we make will bring us the success we desire, but never trying is sure to guarantee failure. Many choose the option of not trying because they prefer that to coming face to face with failure. A woman I know was seriously ill when she was a child and therefore lacked a good and well-rounded education. She decided in her adult life to enroll in a one-year course to further her education. As she neared the end of the course and examinations, she dropped out, giving as the reason that her domestic problems were putting too much stress on her. Her instructor was confident she had sufficient grasp of the course to fly through every one of the examination papers. She enrolled for the same course the following year, and once again, as she came toward the end of the course and the examinations loomed, she dropped out for the same reason: domestic problems. Before enrolling for the third year, she decided to visit a counselor who recognized immediately that she was struggling with a fear of failure and an uncertain goal. He asked her a searching question that took them to the heart of her problem. What do you think would happen if you took the examination and failed? I would be devastated, was her reply. From there, the counselor was able to proceed and show her how her uncertain goal arose from a fear that if she failed, her self-concept would not be able to stand it. Your God is too small, said the counselor. If your confidence about who you are as a person rested in the true God and his evaluation of your worth, you would be able to take the examination, knowing that if you failed, you would be disappointed, but not devastated. A radical reassessment of her basic assumptions about her worth took place. As she learned to put her trust in God and rely on him and him only for her sense of worth, she enrolled for the third time in the course, took the examination, and came through with flying colors. The basic emotional experience one feels when a goal is reachable but uncertain are feelings of anxiety and fear. Obstacle 3. The third stream of problem emotions are those that arise from pursuing a goal that is unattainable. Guilt, shame, and self-pity are some of the emotions that appear in this category. When we hold within ourselves the perception that attaining a certain goal carries the promise that there is life to be found, in that, failure to reach it can result in feelings like guilt and shame. Some goals which people set for themselves are unattainable no matter how hard they try. One woman I worked with, a missionary, told me she was continually plagued with feelings of guilt and shame, despite the fact that she was not involved in any moral violations. During the course of counseling, it became clear that she strongly believed that she must do everything perfectly. Every night, she said, when I am on the mission field, I make a list of the things I have to do the next day, and if I am not able to do them all, I go to my bed at night with great feelings of guilt, embarrassment, and shame. This woman came to believe that good feelings about herself depended on doing everything perfectly. Her objective was the unattainable goal of perfection. Whenever she failed to achieve her goal, she came down hard on herself with words of self-derogation, invective, and despairing remorse. Her problem was resolved when she changed the basis of her beliefs and came to understand that good feelings about herself depended not on doing everything perfectly, but on how well she related to God and lived in the light of His evaluation of her worth. Many young men have been prevented from asking a girl out on a date because they fear being turned down. Such a young man may decide in his mind to do it, but then as he prepares to follow through on his decision, he wonders how he will feel if she turns him down. His desire for the date can be strong and solid, but as he reaches for the phone or prepares to approach her, a fear of failure can arise in his heart that is stronger than his desire. The block is not outside him, but inside him. If he perceives that reaching the goal of a successful date is where his identity as a person lies, he can withdraw from pursuing that goal by his fear of failure. He may stand by the telephone for several minutes, even pick up the handset, press a few digits, then hang up. Some have confessed to doing this a dozen times. The fifth key to understanding what lies behind our problems is unsettling negative emotions. We are ready now to complete our thinking in relation to how problems arise in the personality. We began by making the point that before we can overcome our problems, we must first understand how they arise and how they are maintained. The source can be physical, a malfunction in the body that carries over to the soul. If there is no physical basis for the problem, then it usually arises and develops because of a deep sense of unfulfillment caused by a failure to let God be God. Based on the fact that we are thirsty people, we will seek ways to find satisfaction for our souls, and whatever we believe will bring us that satisfaction will become a goal. We experience any interference to those goals in the form of negative emotions. And these emotions, depending on how important the goals are to us, can be deeply debilitating and incapacitating. Here then, in summarized form, are the 5 causes behind our personal problems. 1. Uncorrected physical disorders. 2. Unsatisfied deep longings. 3. Unnoticed wrong thinking. 4. Unrecognized wrong goals. And 5. Unsettling negative emotions. At this point, you may be saying to yourself, I know how to correct physical problems, get good medical attention, but how do I go about dealing with the other 4 areas? That will come later. First, as I have pointed out, it is important to understand ourselves better so that we can bring all parts of our personality into submission to Christ and thus experience the thrill of Christ-empowered living. Before we move on to look at the principles for overcoming our problems, we have one more issue to confront: the danger of trying to live life without depending on God. To that issue we turn now.